The Borrowers by Nancy Norton. The borrowers are tiny people hidden away in houses, in safe places, living off what they borrow from human beings. Pod and Homily want daughter Arietti to be safe, never seen, but she feels lonely and trapped. The boy visiting Great Aunt Sophie brings doll furniture in exchange for Arietti reading, until mean housekeeper, Miss Driver, calls the rat catcher. Chapter 1. It was Miss May who first told me about them. No, not me. How could it have been me? A wild, untidy, self-willed little girl who stared with angry eyes and was said to crunch her teeth. Kate? She should have been called. Yes, that was it. Kate. Not that the name matters much either way. She barely comes into the story. Miss May lived in 2 rooms in Kate's parents' house in London. She was, I think, some kind of relation. Her bedroom was on the 1st floor, and her sitting room was a room which, as part of the house, was called the breakfast room. Now, breakfast rooms are all right in the morning when the sun streams in on the toast and marmalade, but by afternoon they seem to vanish a little and to fill with a strange silvery light. There is a kind of sadness in them then, but, child, it was a sadness Kate liked. She would creep in to Miss May just before tea time, and Miss May would teach her to crochet. Miss May was old. Her joints were stiff, and she was not strict exactly, but she had that inner certainty which does instead. Kate was never wild with Miss May, nor untidy, nor self-willed. And Miss May taught her many things besides crochet: how to wind wool into an egg-shaped ball, how to run and fell and plan a darn, how to tidy a drawer, and to lay, like a blessing, above the contents, a sheet of rustling tissue against the dust. "Where's your work, child?" asked Miss May one day, when Kate sat hunched and silent upon the hassock. "You mustn't sit there dreaming. Have you lost your tongue?" "No," said Kate, pulling out her shoe button. "I've lost the crochet hook." They were making a bed quilt in woolen squares. There were 30 still to do. "I know where I put it," she went on hastily. "I put it in the bottom shelf of the bookcase, just beside my bed." "On the bottom shelf?" repeated Miss May, her own needle flicking steadily in the firelight. "Near the floor?" "Yes," said Kate, "but I looked on the floor, under the rug, everywhere. The wool was still there, though, just where I'd left it." "Oh, dear," exclaimed Miss May lightly. "Don't say they're in this house, too." "That what are?" asked Kate. "The borrowers," said Miss May, and in the half-light she seemed to smile. Kate stared a little fearfully. "Are there such things?" she said after a moment. "As what?" "As people, other people, living in a house, who borrow things?" Miss May laid down her work. "What do you think?" she asked. "I don't know," Kate said, pulling hard at her shoe button. "There can't be. And yet," she raised her head, "and yet sometimes I think there must be." "Why do you think there must be?" asked Miss May. "Because of all the things that disappear. Safety pins, for instance. Factories go on making safety pins, and every day people go on buying safety pins, and yet somehow there's never a safety pin just when you need one. Where are they all? Now, at this minute, where do they go? Take needles," she went on. "All the needles my mother ever bought. There must be hundreds. Can't just be lying about this house." "Not lying about the house, no," agreed Miss May. "And all the other things we keep on buying, again and again and again, like pencils and matchboxes and sealing wax and hairpins and drawing pins and thimbles and hat pins," put in Miss May. "And blotting paper." "Yes, blotting paper," agreed Kate, "but not hat pins." "That's where you're wrong," said Miss May, and she picked up her work again. There was a reason for hat pins. Kate stared. A reason? She repeated. I mean, what kind of a reason? Well, there were two reasons, really. A hatpin is a very useful weapon, and, Miss May laughed suddenly, but it all sounds such nonsense, and, she hesitated, it was so very long ago. But tell me, said Kate, tell me how you know about the hatpin. Did you ever see one? Miss May threw her a startled glance. Well, yes, she began. Not a hatpin, exclaimed Kate impatiently. A whatever you call them. A borrower? Miss May drew a sharp breath. No, she said quickly. I never saw one. But someone else saw one, cried Kate. And you know about it. Lean see you do. Hush, said Miss May. No need to shout. She gazed downward at the upturned face, and then she smiled, and her eyes slid away into distance. I had a brother, she began uncertainly. Kate knelt upon the hassock, and he saw him. I don't know, said Miss May, shaking her head. I just don't know. She smoothed out her work upon her knee. He was such a tease. He told us so many things, my sister and me, impossible things. He was killed, she added gently, many years ago now, on the northwest frontier. He became colonel of his regiment. He died what they called a hero's death. Was he your only brother? Yes, and he was our little brother. I think that was why, she thought for a moment, still smiling to herself. Yes, why he told us such impossible stories, such strange imaginings. He was jealous, I think, because we were older, and because we could read better. He wanted to impress us. He wanted, perhaps, to shock us. And yet, she looked into the fire, there was something about him, perhaps because we were brought up in India, among mystery and magic and legend, something that made us think that he saw things that other people could not see. Sometimes we'd know he was teasing, but at other times, well, we were not so sure. She leaned forward, and, in her tidy way, brushed a fan of loose ashes under the grate. Then, brush in hand, she stared again at the fire. He wasn't a very strong little boy. The first time he came home from India, he got rheumatic fever. He missed a whole term at school and was sent away to the country to get over it, to the house of a great aunt. Later, I went there myself. It was a strange old house. She hung up the brush on its brass hook, and dusting her hands on her handkerchief, she picked up her work. Better light the lamp, she said. Not yet, begged Kate, leaning forward. Please go on. Please tell me. But I've told you. No, you haven't. This old house, wasn't that where he saw... Miss May laughed. Where he saw the borrowers? Yes, that's what he told us, what he'd have us believe. And what's more, it seems he didn't just see them, but that he got to know them very well, that he became part of their lives, as it were. In fact, you might almost say that he became a borrower himself. Oh, do tell me. Please try to remember, right from the beginning. But I do remember, said Miss May. Oddly enough, I remember it better than many real things that have happened. Perhaps it was a real thing. I just don't know. You see, on the way back to India, my brother and I had to share a cabin. My sister used to sleep with our governess, and on those very hot nights, often we couldn't sleep, and my brother would talk for hours and hours, going over old ground, repeating conversation, telling me details again and again, wondering how they were and what they were doing. They? Who were they exactly? Homily, Pod, and little Arietti. Pod? Yes, even their names were never quite right. They imagined they had their own names, quite different from human names, but with half an ear you could tell that they were borrowed. Even Uncle Hendry and Eglatinas, everything they had was borrowed. They had nothing of their own at all. Nothing. In spite of this, my brother said they were touchy and conceited, and thought they owned the world. How do you mean? They thought human beings were just invented to do the dirty work, great slaves put there for them to use. At least that's what they told each other. But my brother said that, underneath, he thought they were frightened. It was because they were frightened, he thought, that they had grown so small. Each generation had become smaller and smaller and more hidden. In the olden days, it seems, and in some parts of England, our ancestors talked quite openly about the little people. Yes, said Kate, I know. Nowadays, I suppose, if they exist at all, you would only find them in houses which are old and quiet and deep in the country, and where human beings live to a routine. Routine is their safeguard. They must know which rooms are to be used and when. They do not stay long where there are careless people, or unruly children, or certain household pets. This particular old house, of course, was ideal, although as far as some of them were concerned, a trifle cold and empty. Great-Aunt Sophie was bedridden through a hunting accident some 20 years before, and as for other human beings,